Hello, Canada, and welcome to another episode of the Maple Pill. As always, I'm your host, Matt McKeever. Hope you guys are having a good Wednesday night so far. We've got a lot of different stories to cover tonight, and yeah, the first half of the show is going to be just kind of taken up with trucker convoy updates. Hopefully, you guys aren't getting sick of it, but it just seems like such a dynamic situation that we're currently living through. As I mentioned in the past, I truly believe that we're witnessing history in the making right now. And yes, of course, at all points in time, it's technically history in the making. But I do think that there's something special about this moment in time, right? We're seeing lots of different sympathy protests sparking up across the US as well as other countries. In addition to that, I think that we're finally starting to see more and more Canadians coming to the conclusion that they can't necessarily trust mainstream media and the politicians to always tell them exactly at face value what the hell is going on in their own country. But before we even get into the trucker update, what I wanted to share with you guys was a quick reminder. I brought up this video a couple days ago, or maybe it was on Friday's episode. But if you haven't watched this episode yet of Jordan Peterson talking to Brian Peckford, who's the last living signatory of the Canadian Charter of Freedoms and Rights, I'm begging you guys, please go listen to this. I think it's really important you become more informed about how the rule of law and our Charter of Rights works here in Canada. Personally, I don't think it's a perfect system we've got, but it's the system that we have. And so it's important we understand it. And right now, I see a lot of narratives popping up in mainstream media saying that, hey, you know what? Vaccine mandates aren't really against the Charter of Rights. Well, understand that Brian Peckford is literally suing the government, and he's doing it on behalf of all Canadians to essentially state, no, I'm pretty sure I understood what we were trying to sign at that moment in time. And it's a great episode. It starts off a little bit unusual. So I'm going to tell you the first 20 minutes maybe seems like a little out of place, but then they officially get into the interview and really start covering the subject matter that's important. So again, really important you guys go watch it, as well as show your support for Jordan Peterson. He's constantly been kind of a punching bag for the liberal left here in Canada. And again, it's more important now than ever before that we stand up and speak out, because as I mentioned yesterday, whether we like it or not, we are living through a cultural civil war here, not just in Canada, but across, Western democracies. But right now, for whatever reason, this moment in time, Canada is actually at the forefront of fighting and creating, I don't know what else to say other than common knowledge, as game theory would dictate for other Western democracies, that, hey, you know what? I thought it was just my country that was, eroding our freedoms and slipping further and further into tyranny. And I didn't know anyone else was not okay with this either. I really appreciate those of you that have been sending me DMs, showing me support, and just letting me know that, hey, it's so refreshing to, feel like I've got an ally. Because again, that's what they want, is for you, for me, for us to feel isolated, alone, like we're some sort of fringe minority, if we were to quote Justin Trudeau. So again, if you guys get value out of what I'm doing here, you need to go and watch this Jordan Peterson podcast. I know it can be hard to want to commit to like an hour and a half podcast that's just on the Charter of Freedoms and Rights here in Canada, but please do it, because I see so much mainstream media coverage that's really trying to push the opposite perspective here. And this is important. Again, I don't know what will come of this. I don't know how this plays out, but it is important that people are at least pushing and fighting for this. That being said as well, I see a lot of narratives developing right now in mainstream media about how, most of the protesters are going home. They've opened up a lane on the Alberta border crossing. It looks like the trucker protest is losing steam. Just know that, and we'll cover this in a little bit with a few other stories, but there's a lot of people that it looks like plan on going to demonstrate and start other blockades and protests in other manners. This weekend, I've seen several citizen journalists essentially showing that almost all the hotels in downtown and central Ottawa are booked up. So again, if you guys were sitting on the fence, maybe for whatever reason you haven't been able to participate yet in one of those protests, I encourage you, if you're so inclined, to go do so. And again, just don't buy into the mainstream narrative that like, it's lost all steam. There's only like 100 people there now. Again, we've seen really what their word is worth up until this point in time. So don't now all of a sudden become complicit or fall victim to their narrative. It appears that every single day, every single day, there's more and more people showing up and supporting these truckers. And again, obviously some people can't for whatever reason, be there all the time. But if you guys can be there, if you can support and you're so inclined, again, I really encourage you to go do so. All right, enough of the preamble. Let's get into some trucker updates. So just like I mentioned, where'd my mouse go here? Just like I mentioned yesterday, I think True North is doing one of the best recaps. So I've got a link in the video description down below to their article. As always, there's links in the video description down below to every single thing we're going to touch upon today. I'm not going to hit any specifics from the True North article, but again, just know it's there if you guys want to get updated on all the details. But there's lots of great stuff in here, showing the pizza ovens that are feeding the homeless, as well as the trucker protesters, showing a bunch of trucker protesters playing hockey. A lot of truckers and protesters in Ottawa have been shoveling the sidewalks and things of that nature. So again, just because mainstream media chooses to ignore that stuff doesn't mean it's not happening. And speaking about others joining, Quebec City Police prepare for Freedom Convoy, say they're in contact with the organizers. So again, this is just an article about how more people from Quebec are planning to support the protests and go there this weekend. So again, just know that there's still lots of activity going on in that regards as well. This is from Chad Prather's website. If I remember correctly, he's running for governor of Texas. And so, he's just highlighting here that additional kind of protest is occurring in the U.S. They're hoping to have it even be larger than what's going on here in Canada. So if nothing else, maybe we can have some, North American rivalry here. And that's another reason just to get out there and show your support here in Canada as well. For those of you in America, be aware that there appears to be a large protest movement growing. Again, I think this is all a net benefit overall for just everyone in Western democracies that want to see their individual freedom and autonomy handed back to them from the government or taken back from the government. Now, I wanted to hit upon Western Standard again. As I mentioned yesterday, they've had some of the best live coverage about what's going on in Coutts, Alberta, at the only 24-hour border crossing into Montana in the United States. So again, really encourage you guys to check it out. Lots of great coverage here. And right now, essentially, the real developing factor here is and there's two sides to this narrative, okay? So if you look at what mainstream media says, they make it sound like the truckers have partially caved in. They've opened up lanes, both north and southbound, at least one lane going in each direction, and that now traffic's beginning to slowly move. And they're essentially framing it, from what I saw, as if the truckers were losing momentum. And so this is from but I'll get to that in a second. This is from CTV News. Breakthrough in Alberta border blockade, lanes open in both directions. So as the article states, Chad Williamson, a lawyer representing truckers blocking access to the border crossing at Coutts, Alberta, says they have spoken with Mounties and agreed to open some blocked lanes. Frankly, the protesters feel their message has been heard, he said. Nobody wants this blockade to happen anymore. Williamson said the protesters are starting to feel they have been heard, but this isn't over. Trucks and other vehicles have begun clearing two lanes, one going north and one going south. So again, one thing I want to highlight that I didn't see in many of the mainstream media articles that were covering this is why the truckers feel like their voice is being heard. And so if you guys were to go, and I think I just saw this tweeted out, so I didn't have a chance to pull it up, but Ezra from Rebel News was essentially saying that the reason that the truckers feel like they've been heard is in fact because a lot of the rural MLAs, so the members of the Legislative Assembly in Alberta, that they're on board with removing restrictions. And I think actually in a couple stories from now, I'll have an actual clip there from one of the spokespersons of the Coutts protest. But this is from the Toronto Star. Protesters at Alberta border blockade agreed to open lanes. So the information from police seemed... Oh, and then what I wanted to highlight here was earlier Kenny came out saying essentially that, police officers had been assaulted and the RCMP didn't back him up on that misinformation. Again, at what point in time does mainstream media and politicians get labeled as misinformation? And why is it only those of us in the fringe minority constantly get that label, demonetized, shadow banned and all that? But from the article here from the Toronto Star, the information from police seems to contradict a statement Alberta Premier Jason Kenney made Tuesday while updating media on the tense situation in Coutts. the premier had said he'd received reports of people with the blockade assaulting RCMP officers not long after the Mounties attempted to move the vehicles out. However, RCMP spokesperson Corporal Curtis Peters told the Star early Wednesday morning that he hadn't heard of any assaults on officers. We did have some dangerous situations with officers and vehicles, tractors and stuff like that went around our roadblock and came through ditches, Peters said. But again, there was no actual assaults, and that's coming directly from the RCMP. And I guess one thing I do want to highlight here is how much respect I've got for both the Ottawa Police Service as well as the RCMP at the Alberta border. Both those groups have seemed to really focus on de-escalating things, regardless of what the politicians, the powers that be above them, are constantly focused on doubling down on rhetoric and demonizing the protesters. They actually seem to be very cool and collected when approaching this. And I've definitely seen those on social media that are in favor of the trucker convoy. You know, they believe they're reading between the lines that the RCMP and the Ottawa Police Service support the protesters more than maybe is being let on. Again, that's all like theoretical or hearsay at this point in time, so I wouldn't hang my hat on that, but just kind of an FYI, that is one of the things that we're hearing. So from Rebel News now, breaking: rural Alberta MLAs set to discuss lifting all mandates. So as broken by Rebel News, Keon Simone, the truckers revealed that rural MLAs in the province are set to hold a meeting this afternoon to discuss agreeing to the truckers' demands. This agreement hinges on the protesters allowing one lane of traffic to pass through the border. So I'm just going to play this clip here from one of the truckers who's a spokesperson. And I guess what I'm going to say right off the bat is, you know, while he maybe doesn't have all his words collected and he's not necessarily a statesman or a speaker, that only makes me respect him more. Right? Like, this isn't someone that's seeking fame or attention. This is someone that truly just believes what they're doing is right, at least in my humble opinion. All right, let's get this going.
They are supporting us 100% with what we're doing, but they cannot continue to support us if we don't open up one lane of traffic across that border. They said if we open that lane of traffic, they will drop the rural mandates and what's that other one called? The RE? The REP program.
What is that?
That means
the tier system.
The tier system.
Social differences from obedient people to
tax passports. That's correct.
Alex,
and they do not meet our requests, that border is shut again immediately.
So again, from my perspective and from what appears to be in this clip, it sounds like the truckers, as they've always stated, they want to have open dialogue and discussions and negotiations, but at the same time, they're not going to be pushed around. So they did this as a sign of good faith. Now, one of the rumors that Ezra posted on his Twitter that, again, unfortunately, I didn't get time to add in the video description or pull it up here, but I did see it on my cell phone, was he saying that essentially there's just a delay of these rural MLAs coming out and announcing the changes to the mandates because Jason Kenney said he wanted to get in front of this news cycle. And essentially, like, if you guys go deep into the comments and stuff, some of the commenters are saying because he didn't want to get Erin O'Tooled, which we'll get into that in a Blue Pill story in a little bit here. But again, just wanted to kind of highlight how interesting it is how this can be presented in two very different lights, depending upon what your predisposition is, I guess. So that's kind of my updates on everything going on with the truckers and the Freedom Convoy protests at this point in time. Again, I encourage you guys, if you're so inclined, go support them, whatever that means to you. But again, I'm really proud to see fellow Canadians standing up, speaking out, and continuing to just act like, honestly, just like amazing citizens, in my opinion. I know that we're going to cover a couple other articles that where other organizers and other protest movements are throwing shade at this. And I just want to say that, to me, this is much closer to the original Occupy Wall Street type movement, where you've actually just got groups of people that are frustrated with the system. They understand something's broken, something's not right, and they're just done with it. And they want to do whatever it takes in order to get a resolution and solve this problem. unlike a lot of professional protesters or professional organizers that almost see this as like their calling in life or their business, these are just salt of the earth people that are actually fed up with what's going on. And again, I'm biased, but I really respect what they're doing. And hopefully it comes through in these videos, as well as the fact that, you know, I've been tempted to want to go to Ottawa on more than one occasion now. I may still end up caving to that temptation, but currently I believe I'm creating as much or more value for the movement by simply reporting on it with the Maple Pill. Again, if you guys think I'm being a little bitch, let me know in that comment section. I'm open to your perspectives. And if you guys are in Ottawa, if you are at the Coutts border in Alberta, I'd love to hear your thoughts, your perspectives, and what you're seeing anecdotally as boots on the ground. But let's jump into the first blue pill story of the day. So Bank of Canada head says it is unclear how quickly inflation will drop. So reminder, we covered this last Wednesday, but Bank of Canada held rates at 0.25. So again, proving the doves they are versus being a hawk. And so Macklem said the central bank expects inflation to peak around 5% in the coming months. And reminder, this is from the same people that told us that inflation was transitory last year. We do expect inflation is going to remain uncomfortably high in the first half of this year before coming down fairly quickly in the second half as the pandemic recedes and things normalize, he added. Anyone want to take bets on that? Because you know what? I know which side of the bet I'd want to be on to whether inflation's going to come back down and normalize by the end of the year. Because, yeah, I think this is the same bullshit as the same bullshit that we saw in regards to Scotiabank saying they expected 7 rate hikes. Another quote here, it will be a series of increases, not a single increase, he said, adding that the bank will keep a close eye on how those moves impact inflation and other aspects of the economy. Yeah, I just don't believe anything they say. Moving on to CBC. So CBC News, inflation isn't the main factor driving Canada's sky-high housing costs, experts say. And now this to me feels like CBC at least partially carrying water for the federal Liberal Party against Pierre Poilievre. But I'll explain my thoughts after we get through the article. So here we go. The inflation in house prices followed the government printing about $400 billion of new cash, dumping it into the financial system, much of which was lent out in mortgages, conservative finance critic Pierre Poilievre told CBC News. More dollars chasing fewer goods means inflation, and in this case, housing inflation. That is technically correct. That, you know, more dollars chasing the same amount of goods or fewer goods will result in inflation. CREA sales figures show a 318% rise in home prices since 2000, suggesting today's high housing prices have been decades in the making. Now, this oversimplifies things to a large extent, in my opinion. So let's pull up exactly how prices have been increasing. And so, unfortunately, I couldn't find better data than data that started in 1970. Now, what would be really interesting is if you had a 100-year timeline, you're going to see that like real estate almost stayed even until we essentially went off the gold standard in the 1970s. But we can see from, 1970 until 1985, almost nothing occurs. Then we experience the kind of the tail end of the crazy inflation in the late 80s. And then kind of settled in 1990 and again stayed even until almost the mid-aughts. And again, you'll remember that there was a lot of loose monetary policy that occurred during the financial crisis in the United States. And again, in 2009, the Canadian real estate market caught its breath. And since about like 20, depending upon what exact market you are, but like on a nationally aggregated level, essentially from like 2015, 2016, it's just been like number go up economics pretty well. And again, it did kind of catch its breath in 2017 there for a bit. But understand that I think it's disingenuous to say that it's not caused by inflation because it's gone up 318% since over the last 20 years, which again, like imagine using that as an argument about this, right? It's just wild to me, but inflation is just a byproduct of terrible monetary policy, right? Or loose monetary policy, printing press goes burr, that sort of thing. And so it's maybe not the whole picture to say that inflation's causing this, but understand that it's 100% under the government's control what happens to housing prices, at least in this regard, right? The fact that your dollar is every year losing money due to inflation, which is built into their monetary policy, that's That's a feature, not a bug from a politician's perspective, from a central banker's perspective. Whereas for the average citizen, it's literally the exact opposite. It's the inverse. So again, I find that frustrating, but we're still in the blue pill, so I'm not going to try not go off yet. Now this story from Reuters. So analysts, rightward shift may cost Canada's divided Conservatives. I just want to highlight this because I feel like they jumped to conclusions. They already decided how they want to frame this article and then just went for it. So Ottawa, February 2nd, Reuters, an ongoing protest in Canada's capital is unlikely to succeed in its objective of repealing COVID-19 vaccine mandates, but is pulling a troubled Conservative opposition even further to the right, eroding its chances of returning to power. Now, without any real data here, let me just kind of and they don't share any real data either, but let me share a couple kind of thought experiments. So essentially their argument is the only way the Conservatives will get into power is to be liberals, right? Or to be liberal light or be in the center. Well, at that point in time, what good is having an opposition party if they're just going to agree with the liberals? Kind of counterintuitive. In fact, I would argue a lot of people, when they're looking at two flavors of vanilla, I don't even give a shit which vanilla I'm going to get. They're either not going to vote or they'll probably just vote for the vanilla flavor they're already familiar with. Whereas, as we saw in 2016 with the election of Donald Trump, again, remember at that point in time, a lot of people were framing it that he'd pushed Republicans too far to the right, and because of that, there was no way they were going to win. Everyone predicted Hillary was going to sweep in, right? She was going to win undoubtedly, and then come election night, all of a sudden we saw that the silent majority actually didn't mind a lot of Trump's positions. And I would argue that with Erin O'Toole, the fact that he essentially was just, Justin Trudeau's shadow, or he was a liberal light himself, is the reason that a lot of people are indifferent to him. He didn't, at least for me, I won't speak for others, but he didn't spark any sort of confidence, any enthusiasm from me. And especially when you see guys like Max at the PPC, right, the People's Party of Canada, you're like, oh, hey, this isn't another flavor of vanilla. This is something different. I think that hurt the Conservatives just as much as anything else there, right? Which is the fact that they're further to the right if we're going to use the left-right spectrum. And the reason we're all discussing this right now is if somehow you were sleeping under a rock today, this is from the Toronto Sun, but the O'Toole was kicked out of his leadership role. I believe it was, and we'll probably come upon it in a second, but it was 73 or 76 to 43 or 46. And from the Toronto Sun, the potential candidates to replace Erin O'Toole as Conservative leader, some potential candidates have already ruled themselves out, while others are holding their cards close to the vest. Now, you'll see a lot of people on, I think, Canadian Twitter really pushing for Pierre Poilievre if they lean right or if they're in the Conservative Party. But there are several other candidates. At this point in time, it seems like Pierre is either playing coy or doesn't seem to want to throw his hat in the ring at this point in time. I don't think that's bad strategy at this point. I don't know. I guess, if I was to give my hot take on the situation, I imagine at some point in time, he's going to want to become the leader of the Conservative Party. But do you really want to step in right now? Or would you rather have some interim leader run it for a bit, and then when we get closer to an election, kind of stand up and stand out? Again, just kind of my thought. But so some of the top runners, according to the Toronto Sun, is Pierre Poilievre, Peter MacKay, Michelle Rempel, and Leslyn Lewis. And did they also? Oh, and then Patrick Brown. I'm not sure why Patrick didn't get highlighted here. And then they also throw out some more, returnees and stuff like Stephen Harper and stuff like that. But I don't think Stephen Harper is going to want to return to the shit show that is the CPC. But hey, time will tell. And from Post Millennial here, it's time to replace Erin O'Toole with Pierre Poilievre. So if you want to read some of the arguments for why Pierre should step up and step into this role, it's a great article, but we're going to keep rolling here on tonight's Maple Pill because I've got a lot of shit to cover. And this is just the last blue pill story. This probably could have been a clown pill story as well. But did you guys see that crazy fist fight, riot, disturbance, whatever you want to frame it as, at was a Golden Corral buffet in the United States over the last piece of steak? I'm not even going to play the video for you guys, but there's a little photo shot of it there. All I want to say is that, there's 10,000 plus truckers and Canadians protesting in Ottawa being called, violent, even though they're not violent. And I understand that people will fight each other over a piece of steak. And yet we've seen a impressive amount of restraint, in my opinion, by both the police services as well as the protesters up until this point in time. So just kind of wanted to highlight that. Now let's move on to the red pill. And this one does grind my gears. This is from the Hill Times. Comparing freedom protesters to other social movements is unfair and dangerous, says MPs and activists. So as the article goes on, activists and organizers of movements like Black Lives Matter and Idle No More say comparing their movement to the actions by protesters at this week's anti-vaccine mandate protest in Ottawa is ludicrous. In question period on January 31st, Conservative MP and Deputy Leader Candice Bergen from Manitoba, who has been criticized for engaging with a group of right-wing anti-vaccine mandate protesters who arrived on Parliament Hill on January 29th, made that direct comparison. The protesters say they are fighting for freedom from vaccine mandates, specifically those imposed upon truckers who wish to cross the Canada-US border. The stated objective of their convoy was to remove the Trudeau government, and the broader message could be seen plastered on trucks, signs, and clothing, fuck Trudeau. So I think that that's probably an oversimplification and distillation of their overall goal, right? As we kind of talked about earlier on in the show, I really do view them as more of an Occupy Wall Street, where there's different interests and different groups kind of involved with this, but certainly being anti-vaccine mandate was one of the cruxes. And they've released a press release, essentially, the organizers of the original protest. So again, you guys can go read that. That's been some of our previous video descriptions. But I think it's interesting the way this entire article is framed, and I encourage you guys go read all of it. But essentially, there's like what I find humorous is they do bring up the fact that Black Lives Matters protesters did tear down statues of John A. Macdonald. They threw paint on things, they destroyed public property, but that's way different. Where in this case, putting a hat and a flag and having Terry Fox hold a sign, well, that crosses a line. And essentially the crux of their argument is that John A. Macdonald and the other statues they attacked and destroyed and caused real harm towards, essentially their argument there is those people caused harm to them, and that's what they were directly protesting against. But again, if you start to pull apart that ball of wax a bit, all of a sudden you'd be like, okay, so if the truckers were to attack the people that they blame for their issues, that would be okay under your logic. So if they were to attack Justin Trudeau, that would be okay. And obviously they would not say that that's okay, but it just feels disingenuous here. And, it's interesting to me that when you look at some of the individuals that are organizers of these other movements, a lot of them seem to really have a large portion of their prestige, their income, their livelihoods are kind of driven by being the organizers of these movements. Whereas again, with these trucker protests, this feels much more grassroots, just bottom up. Like people are just fucking sick and tired of shit. And so they're reacting to a situation they find unpalatable. Again, I just think it's disingenuous for the mainstream media to focus and approach it this way. Because again, some MPs say this, but then you've got the some conservative MPs that don't say that, right? And just when did activists or organizers of another protest all of a sudden become experts on someone else's protest, right? I can only imagine if the Freedom Convoy started commenting on pro-Palestinian protesters or in their organization, their movement, and their use of the swastika and their use of anti-Jewish rhetoric versus what's going on now. Right. Or again, that can be applied to Black Lives Matter. That can be applied to Idle No More. And understand, I'm not trying to throw shade at these other movements. I've got no dog in that fight. I think that everyone should be allowed to protest against things that they find wrong. Right. If you break the law, you should probably be held accountable for breaking the law. The same way that those trucker protesters at the border in Alberta, they said openly, we understand we might get fined. We understand we might get arrested, but it's worth it for us. And so again, if a Black Lives Matter protester or an Idle No More protester approaches it and their situation under a similar guise with the understanding that hey, if I'm trespassing, if I'm causing destruction of public property and things of that nature, I might get arrested. I might get fined. I might be penalized for that, but I'm okay with that. Again, I'm not going to throw judgment on either one of those decisions or those individual actors. I think the real key is just the desire to see everyone be relatively, at least, treated equally under the law, and ideally relatively be treated equally as far as the mainstream press is concerned, the corporate press, the legacy media as well. And I don't feel that, at least on the latter side of things, that's the case right now, right? It seems like it's difficult for me to believe that mainstream media would go after almost any other protest than this protest with the same sort of rhetoric, with the same sort of straw man arguments, with the same sort of gaslighting. But again, that's me. That's my hot take. Love to hear your thoughts, your opinions. And again, I didn't even have time to fit or shoehorn it into today's show. But like, for example, CN Rail announced that they weren't going to charge anyone that shut down all the rail lines, right? Again, understand that like last year, there was protests where Indigenous people, First Nations were going and protesting and blocking rail lines. Yeah, I'm not going to say it's right. I'm not going to say it's wrong. But understand, like, a lot of people that could have, in theory, been charged there weren't. Again, I imagine that there's people in theory that could have been charged at the trucker protest that also will turn out to not be charged. That doesn't immediately mean that they've got white privilege, or it doesn't immediately mean that they're white supremacists. I wish that we could actually trust the mainstream press to just report on shit, right? Or if you're going to be biased, be blatant about your bias, right? At least I think you guys understand where I stand. And when I go off the cuff, I think it's very obvious that I'm being a little biased. So continuing down the red pill here, this is from National News Watch. Ottawa launches promised supply chain discussions with shippers and transporters. And so what I want to highlight here is there's this continuing evolving narrative that regardless of COVID-19, or if it's climate change or some other disaster, we're going to continue to have supply chain issues. And this has nothing to do with the truckers, but we are going to have supply chain issues. We covered it last week in an article where essentially The Economist came out from the Agabus group, essentially saying that, we're no longer having transitory supply chain issues or temporary supply chain issues. We're entering the shortage economy. Understand that right now you're watching a narrative be formed, and very soon, in my humble opinion, we're going to see framing and discussions of like, check your privilege if you expect to see full shelves on grocery stores. Check your privilege if you expect to be able to get imported fruits and vegetables and things of that nature in the middle of winter. And in my opinion, a lot of this isn't going to be because of the trucker protest long term. A lot of this isn't going to be because of COVID-19 or even mandates or restrictions like that. It's probably going to come as a result of carbon taxes, ESG, and other initiatives that, the elites at the World Economic Forum, at the international, at the IMF, at the Davos group. I think that those are the individuals that are really going to be impacting our supply chain on a long time horizon. But this article states, Ottawa, a task force will be created by the federal government to develop short and long-term actions to fix shortcomings in the country's national supply chain. Transport Minister Omar Al-Jabra announced following a half-day virtual summit January 31st among 5 cabinet ministers and more than 80 leaders of manufacturers, shippers, and transporters. The task force will be the first step in developing a comprehensive action plan that ensures our supply chain is stronger and more resilient for the future in our changing climate, Al-Jabra said. As part of the plan, a series of regional and industry consultations for different sectors will be held in the coming months. The summit was not the end of the conversation, is just the beginning. Again, whenever the government says that they're here to help, I'm just like, oh God, what are you going to fuck up? But again, that's me and my bias bubbling to the surface. From the Globe and Mail here, the Freedom Convoy was hauling a load of bad ideas, but the people on board are not the enemy. And I just wanted to highlight this because this is actually like one of those little soft points, it appears, in the mainstream blue pill media where they're actually starting to be like, okay, maybe they're not all evil. Maybe some of them are good people. And just wanted to highlight it for you guys. So remember how it was 2 years ago? Remember how Canadians were united in a sense of solidarity that however bad things were, at least we were all in this together, is how the article starts. And I just want to highlight this one paragraph from it. However, in responding to the people honking horns in front of his office, the PM went far beyond just dismissing their demands. Instead, from Mr. Trudeau on down, ministers and MPs spoke words that seemed designed to polarize and radicalize the situation by demonizing the protesters rather than calmly refuting their ideas. Yeah. Could you imagine if, the mainstream press or the politicians decide to just be like, hey, we're actually just going to lay out to you guys why we can't react the way Sweden did to the pandemic, why we can't give you back your freedoms, even though we've now got 90% of adults in Canada double vax, and, we had 2 years to fix our crumbling health infrastructure. I could go down rabbit hole here on our crumbling health infrastructure, but I'm going to save that for a special episode when there's a lull in the news cycle, because, again, understand that we're essentially no better off as far as ICU beds are concerned today versus 2 years ago. Yet we're somehow in this pandemic. I understand that we spent over $300 million on field hospitals that we've literally never put a single patient in, and some of those field hospitals 2 years later still have not been delivered. Oh, yeah. And half of that contract went to that SNC Lavalin company that we talked about yesterday. Interesting, right? Again, I encourage you guys to go read the entire article here from the Globe and Mail. Then kind of continuing on, this is from The Conversation. So politicizing COVID-19 vaccinations effort has fueled vaccine hesitancy. The current political landscape has become increasingly intertwined with vaccine policy. Platforms from political parties have included vaccine mandates, third dose policies, and mandatory vaccination proposals aimed at children. Quebec has even proposed taxing people who remain unvaccinated. Now they have walked back their stance, Quebec, on taxing the unvaxxed. But why don't we actually look at some of the data? While many equate vaccine mandates with vaccine uptake, much of the work was done prior to imposing mandates. In Ontario, for example, 77% of the population 12 and up had already received 2 doses when the proof of vaccination requirement was announced on September 1st, 2021. That number only rose another 12% to 89% as of late January 2022. So can you guys show me, can the politicians show me, can anyone really justify why vaccine passports and mandates were necessary for that extra 12%? How are we different now from September 1st versus today in January 2022? Spoiler alert, we're not. That's just the case. Continuing on, this is from the Canada Free Press, and this is really concerning. This has to do with pharmacists and their oath being changed in the United States. So pharmacists ingest woke poison. Obviously, this article is a little biased here. Oh, did it undo my highlight? God damn it. Oh, no. Okay, there we are. I promise to... So this is the new oath that pharmacists have to recite. I promise to devote myself to a lifetime of service to others through the profession of pharmacy. In fulfilling this vow, I will consider the welfare of humanity and relief of suffering my primary concerns. I will promote inclusion, embrace diversity, and advocate for justice to advance health equity. And while it's not part of their oath right now, anti-racism as well was one of the pillars that they're essentially trying to implement here. I gotta be honest, maybe I'm so privileged I didn't realize that pharmacists were racist, or that pharmacies were racist or privileged or something like that. But I really don't understand why we would need pharmacists to say an oath where they will promote inclusion, embrace diversity, and advocate for justice to advance health equity. And while none of that language sounds particularly scary or concerning at this stage, I think what's more concerning is how we could eventually continue to see ourselves slip further and further down that slippery slope, as I so often like to bring up when we're talking about these things. So again, I'll leave you guys to go read the entire article. I think it's worth a read as well. In fact, most of the things I share with you guys, I think, are worth a read. But continuing on now, Blacklock's reporter, Feds suspend 1,084 workers. So direct quote here, it's been proven, and this is a quote from Algebra again, it's been proven, not by politicians or me, by scientists, by doctors that we hear every day on television, said Algebra. All of us need to remind Canadians to follow the data, follow the science. The science says of people who either have died because of COVID or are hospitalized, 70% are unvaccinated. Now, again, there's a lot of wiggle room here in this language. The first thing is understanding what is actually unvaccinated. Well, do you guys understand that even 2 weeks after being vaccinated, if you get COVID, if you get sick, if you die, that's counted actually as an unvaccinated death, right? So there's manipulation here where I'll leave you guys to do your own research because I'd hate to get canceled on YouTube right now. But if you look at the number of people that report experiencing COVID-like symptoms, that report adverse effects and things like that, within a few weeks of getting the first shot, the second shot, or a booster, understand that actually gets reclassified, not as related to a vaccination or a vaccinated person. That gets classified to an unvaccinated person. Now, again, I can also make a steelman argument for why they approach it that way, because their argument's going to be that the vaccines haven't taken full effect and da-da-da. But I don't think that this is the clear silver bullet that I think he thought it was when he was saying it. But again, that's me. That's my thoughts. But again, it is interesting to see just 1,000 federal workers being suspended. And while I didn't highlight it here, I do just want to point out that essentially the way it's set up is another quote here from Algebra. Let's get everybody vaccinated, including truck drivers. He said Algebra is in an inquiry of ministry tabled in the comments that 34 employees were on unpaid leave for failing to show proof of vaccination. And so essentially the way it's set up right now is the federal employers has the right to keep you on unpaid leave indefinitely until you get the shots or until you're willing to disclose you have the shots. I just find this so difficult to believe that, these people are such a danger to their coworkers 2 years later when they were able to work for the last 2 years. Right? Seems a little fishy, seems a little odd. And there's a few threads we could pull there, but we got other things to cover here today as well. So another red pill story. This is just a quick point of perspective in regards to everything going on in the Ukraine. From Zero Hedge, Putin says U.S. trying to goad Russia into war. Is Ukraine ready for talks in any format? If you guys also see, there's even articles in the mainstream media about the Ukraine saying the West is overemphasizing or amping up the potential risk. The Ukraine didn't want to see diplomats being pulled from the Ukraine from the Western NATO countries either. So this is a direct quote here. After for weeks firmly denying that there are any plans in place for a Russian invasion of Ukraine, Vladimir Putin on Tuesday said the United States is actively trying to goad Russia into an armed conflict with Ukraine. The Russian president suggested this would be used as a pretext to severely isolate Russia, both economically and diplomatically, on the world stage. Their most important task is to contain Russia's development, he said, of Washington's aims. Ukraine is just an instrument of achieving this goal. It can be done in different ways, such as pulling us into some armed conflict and then forcing their allies in Europe to enact those harsh sanctions against us that are being discussed today in the United States. And again, great article. I encourage you guys to go read all of it. It's interesting to see all this posturing at this point in time, because I do think that there's a risk NATO could push too hard, too fast on this. I'm not even going to say that I'm on the side of NATO here, but if they do push too hard, too fast during the winter, understand that, countries like Germany, like Britain, they also depend on petrol, fuel for heating from Russia. And if that completely dries up due to sanctions in winter without being able to build a parallel plan or get alternative heat sources, I think that we're going to see our us being NATO, our European allies a little bit less hungry to, jump on the full sanction bandwagon. Again, a half measure here. I think if I'm wargaming things out from NATO's perspective, isn't really going to do jack shit. So again, it's a very complicated, complex situation, but I don't think we should just be completely swallowing the mainstream's narrative in regards to that. Next one here is from the Mises Institute. So the media war on Canadian truckers is freedom public enemy number one. And yeah, I believe for Justin Trudeau, freedom is truly public enemy number one. The trucker protest was spurred by the Canadian government sweeping COVID vaccine mandates. Many truckers believe the risks of the vaccines outweigh the benefit, and more importantly, that they have the right to control their own bodies. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau declared on Monday, there is no place in our country for threats, violence, or hatred, except for the hatred Trudeau whips up by denouncing vaccine mandate opponents as racist and misogynist, and except for the threats and violence used by government enforcement agents to compel submission to any pandemic decree issued by Trudeau or other politicians. Since the start of the pandemic, many people who boasted of their trust in science and data also believed that absolute power would keep them safe. According to this scorecard, anyone who objected to government commands was the equivalent of a heretic who must be condemned, if not banished, from every place except the cemetery. North of the border, Quebec epitomizes the intolerance with its new edict prohibiting unvaccinated individuals from shopping at Costco or Walmart. Yeah, it's wild times. Again, if you want to go down a further black pill, while Quebec said they're not going to tax the unvaxxed, they actually are looking to implement even more restrictions on them. So that wasn't even the pure good news that I think a lot of us would have liked it to have been. But let's move on to Louder with Crowder. So this is a U.S. story here, but Hershey starts firing unvaccinated employees, demand they sign confidentially agreements first. So essentially, Hershey's here is firing their unvaccinated employees. And in order for those unvaccinated employees to get any severance, they have to sign an agreement of confidentiality where they essentially can't speak out against Hershey. Again, in theory, this is probably technically just a business best practice, right, to get people to sign those waivers. However, when you think about this company having all the power and trying to compel or force individuals into making medical decisions or disclosing medical decisions they've made, I don't think it looks good on Hershey. And I hope that history will judge them harshly for their choice there. Hitting upon house prices as well. This is from Global News. As Canada's home prices soared during COVID-19, real estate money laundering audits fell 64%. That makes sense. And if you guys want to go down a rabbit hole, research how many people that initially get charged or initially get accused of money laundering actually get charged. It's an embarrassing low level of conviction in that sense. And so you can take one of two approaches, I guess, here. One, you can assume that all those charges were originally wrong and false, and like our audits are just terrible and our ability to spot money laundering is terrible, or our enforcement policy is terrible. If you guys really want to go down a rabbit hole, I've mentioned this book before, but Willful Blindness by Sam Cooper is an amazing book. It's actually one of the books I've given out the most copies of. The only book I've given out more copies of is Early Retirement Extreme, then Sam Cooper's Willful Blindness, and then the Bitcoin Standard. But I'm planning to give out a lot more Bitcoin Standard books in the future, so Bitcoin Standard may eventually become my number one given out book, but it'll just be a matter of time. Now let's switch gears into the black pill. You may want a glass of water because there's a lot of black pills to swallow today. But this one from Spencer Fernando. Send in the clown. CBC ties claiming Russia is behind Freedom Convoy. I'm not even going to really cover this at length, but you guys should go check it out. They essentially have no evidence of this whatsoever. Again, is it possible that some Russian individuals gave to the GoFundMe or even Russian state actors did? Not impossible. But again, the same argument could be made for any other charity, for any other organization, any other protest. And yet I've never seen the CBC be like, I don't know more, Black Lives Matters is being instigated by Russian state actors. So I do think it's interesting, the timing of this. And honestly, if I wanted to go super black-pilled on this, the way I would frame it is like, look, the CBC thinks you're so stupid as a Canadian citizen that they assume that if they just pick up the narrative the U.S. had, the false narrative too, right? You can go back now and see that all the Russiagate stuff, like go do your own research on that. And again, there's that name that we're not allowed to say on YouTube or we'll immediately get banned. But like look into it and you'll find out that like, oh shit, Hillary Clinton's side actually leaked these documents, and you could make an argument knowingly misled the FBI into a course of action that created an entire press narrative attacking Donald Trump in his attempt at becoming elected as president of the United States. And I literally think the CBC thinks so little of their audience. They were just like, if we say Russia, they've probably already heard it on CNN, so they'll just automatically believe us. Yeah, pretty black-pilled on that one, CBC. Next black pill from Blacklock's reporter. Internet control bill is back. And this is concerning, guys. I think every single one of us has a duty to write our senators, our members of parliament, and say, look, Bill C-10 does not represent me. I do not want to see YouTube and everyone else governed by these rules, right? Individual citizens should have the right to speak out. And hey, if you're going to regulate us the same way that you do the media companies, then every one of us on YouTube should be getting giant handouts the same way the media companies get giant handouts, subsidies, and all kinds of other economic incentives. And what I'd much rather see is just no economic incentives for anyone that pretends to be the free press, including the CBC. Either you need to come out and be like, hey, we're wing of the state propaganda machine, or we don't take any fucking money from the state, right? Bill C-10 here, an act to amend the Broadcasting Act proposed to have Canadian Radio, Television, and Telecommunications Commissions regulate YouTube videos as public broadcasts. The bill passed the Commons last June 22nd by a vote of 196 to 112, but lapsed in the Senate Communications Committee. Direct quote here, I am swamped with emails, and this is from a senator, I'm swamped with emails from people from all walks of life, especially young people who don't want this, Senator Michael McDonald, Nova Scotia said. Then chair of the Communications Committee, said in an earlier interview, I see no problem with managing streaming services that aren't paying their way, but this bill is disturbing and is taking us down a rabbit hole of internet regulation. Again, I don't even like the dovish nature of this statement, but clearly those emails, those letters do matter. So you guys, you need to do it. Like, if you want any semblance of free speech here in Canada, Bill C-10 cannot pass. Because, again, they're just going to pass additional bills after this. This is a hill to die on. This is a hill to stand up for and speak out on. Continuing down our black pill, this is from Zero Hedge, courtesy of Summit News. And I highlighted this actually earlier in the week, but I need to re-highlight this study from Johns Hopkins University hospital, because it's so, or university, I meant. It's so important that this doesn't slip through the cracks. And I've seen no coverage in the mainstream media about this. So lockdowns imposed enormous economic and social costs, had little to no public health effects, new Johns Hopkins study finds. So the study was authored by Jonas Herby, special advisor at Center for Political Studies in Copenhagen, Denmark, Lars Jonian, professor emeritus in economics at Lund University, Sweden, and Steve H. Henk, professor of applied economics and founder and co-director of the Johns Hopkins Institute for Applied Economics, Global Health, and Study of Business Enterprise. And again, I shared with you guys the actual full study in the previous video, so I encourage you guys go check out the original source. But a quote here from the articles. The focus of the study, according to the authors, was to determine whether there is empirical evidence to support the belief that lockdowns reduce COVID-19 mortality. The researchers defined lockdowns as any government mandate that directly restricts people's possibilities, such as policies that limit internal movement, close schools and businesses, and ban international travel. The researchers further noted that to answer the question, we focused on studies that examine the actual impact of lockdowns on COVID-19 mortality rates based on registered cross-sectional mortality data and a counterfactual difference in difference approach. In other words, did lockdowns reduce COVID-19 deaths? The conclusion is no. This is a direct quote from the study. Lockdowns have had little to no effect on COVID-19 mortality. More specifically, stringency index studies find that lockdowns in Europe and the United States only reduce COVID-19 mortality by 0.2% on average, the study notes. It adds shelter-in-place orders, SIPOs, were also ineffective, only reducing COVID-19 mortality by 2.9% on average. Further noting specific non-pharmaceutical intervention and PI studies also find no broad-based evidence of noticeable effects on COVID-19 mortality. So again, whose science, whose data are we supposed to be following these days? Because if... I'll leave it there. We got a lot to cover. Moving on here now to another black pill. And this one's important too. You guys should really go read this entire article from the Ron Paul Institute. It's courtesy of Matt Tabibi. He's one of the only real reporters, along with Glenn Greenwald these days, that are really doing important reporting. The British medical journey story that exposed politicized fact-checking. Again, in theory, to do it justice, I should read this entire article, but we just don't have time. The Times piece quoted an internal FDA report that said the GlaxoSmithKline diabetes drug, Avandia, also known as rosiglitazone, was linked to 304 deaths in 2009, adding the conclusion of the two doctors who authored the report, rosiglitazone should be removed from the market. The story was released in advance of a Senate Finance Committee study that produced a series of damning internal documents, including one in which an FDA safety officer expressed concerns that Avandia presented such serious cardiovascular risks that safety of the study itself cannot be assured and is not acceptable. So literally the FDA was like, hey, we think this is so dangerous that you shouldn't even study it. One of the chief investigators on that study was Paul Thacker, at the time a committee aide under Iowa Republican Chuck Grassley. Multi-year document hauls like the Avandia reports were Thacker's stock and trade. Further on here now, tying this to COVID-19 advisor, it was more than a little surprising then when Thacker's name appeared in the middle of a bizarre international fact-checking controversy in an article for one of the world's oldest academic outlets, the British Medical Journal. Thacker wrote a piece entitled "COVID-19 Researcher Blows the Whistle on Data Integrity Issues in Pfizer's Vaccine Trial." He did what he'd done countless times, shepherding into print the tale of an apparent whistleblower with an unsettling story. Brooke Jackson worked for a Texas firm called Ventavia that conducted a portion of the research trials for Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine. This is the same vaccine that Thacker himself, who now lives in Spain and is married to a physician, had taken. After going through both legal and peer review, but without contacting Ventavia, apparently they feared an injunction. The BMJ published Thacker's piece on November 2nd, 2021. The money passage read, a regional director who was employed at a research organization, Ventavia Research Group, has told the BMJ that the company falsified data, unblinded patients, employed inadequately trained vaccinators, and was slow to follow up on adverse events reported to Pfizer's pivotal phase 3 trial. And then getting into how this ties into Facebook and fact-checking, Facebook has yet to respond to queries about this piece. Meanwhile, the site that conducted Facebook's fact-check, Lead Stories, ran a piece dated November 10th, whose URL used the term hoax alert. Lead Stories denies they called the BMJ piece a hoax. Moreover, they deployed a rhetoric device that such checking sites now use with regularity, repeatedly correcting assertions Thacker and the British Medical Journal never made. This began with the title, "The British Medical Journal did not reveal disqualifying and ignored reports of flaws in Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine trials." So yeah, you need to really read through that clearly to understand. But again, that had nothing to do with their original claims. In a remarkable correspondence with BMJ editors, Lead Stories editor Alan Duke explained that term missing context was invented by Facebook to deal with content that could mislead without additional context, but which was otherwise true or real. Sometimes Facebook messaging about the fact-checking labels can sound overly aggressive and scary. If you have an issue with this messaging, you should indeed take it up with them, as we are unable to change any of it. Missing context has become a term to disparage reporting that is true but inconvenient. As Thacker notes in a Q&A below, they're checking narrative, not facts. And this is important because the issue here shouldn't be how Thacker presented the information and data. It should be, did you fucking falsify data? Did you unblind participants in what was supposed to be a blind study? Did you have inappropriate people handling the vaccinations and executing the vaccinations, right? The data integrity of these studies is actually important if we want to understand what the hell's going on. But we're going to keep rolling here. This is from Post Millennial, another black pill. Like I said, maybe you need more than just a glass of water, but Black Lives Matter, week of action, teaches students about dismantling the nuclear family. And so, again, understand, this isn't me trying to shit on Black Lives Matter, although I think if you read into a lot of their documentation, a lot of what they state that their intentions are, there are real concerns there. But I want to highlight what Thursday's study involved. Thursday, students will be learning about Black families and Black villages, the disruption of Western nuclear family dynamics, and a return to the collective village that takes care of each other. Now, the reason this is important, any of you guys that have looked at children welfare studies, you'll see time and time again, it doesn't matter how you slice and dice the data, children that come from two-parent households fare better for the rest of their lives than parents that don't. So why is dismantling the nuclear family such a crux of Black Lives Matter? Seriously. Like, I'm not even being facetious here. I don't understand. I think that if they get their way, I think they're going to do a giant disservice to people, like to minorities, to BIPOCs, to whatever you want to frame it as, to literally everyone that starts believing that dismantling the nuclear family is a net benefit to children. Now, again, that doesn't mean that you can't grow up in a loving household that doesn't have two parents, that isn't a nuclear family. But when you look at the sheer data, you're going to see overwhelming proof that nuclear families fare pretty gosh darn well when it comes to raising their children compared to those that aren't nuclear families. So again, I encourage you guys, go read the entire post at Post Millennial. Hey, we got another black pill from Pfizer. So Pfizer begins application process for COVID vaccine for babies. That's enough of a black pill. We don't even really need to read the article. But what I want to highlight here is what your government, the Canadian government, how they're presenting their data. So key updates. The way they break down who's vaccinated, who's got boosters, it's no longer like adults, right? It's literally just showing us total population, 5 years and older, and 5 to 11-year-olds. That's the only data that they're sharing with us. If that doesn't make your spidey senses tingle and make you wonder about what's next in their plans, clearly I'm not doing my job trying to black pill you. Continuing on the black pill, and I promise this is the last black pill. This is from Louder with Crowder. Watch Professor says adults wanting to have sex with children isn't obviously wrong to him. He's a philosophy professor from State University of New York. I can, in theory, make a steelman argument for how this could be taken out of context, but goddamn.
Imagine that an adult male wants to have sex with a 12-year-old girl. Imagine that she's a willing participant. A very standard, very widely held view that there's something deeply wrong about this, and it's wrong independent of it being criminalized. It's not obvious to me that is in fact wrong. I think this is a mistake, and I think that exploring why it's a mistake will tell us not only things about adult-child sex and statutory rape, but also about fundamental principles of morality.
We've had a lot of black pills, so I'll leave you guys to decide how big of a black pill that is for you. And to be honest, I didn't even put together a clown pill today because literally just our society is the clown, in my opinion. So there you guys go. You can thank your mainstream corporate legacy press for that. You can thank your politicians. We can thank the post-secondary institutions that think everything is relative and that... Yeah. All right. Let's get into some white pills. There are some white pills here. CTV News. This is about Manitoba. We're looking at a restriction-free Manitoba by spring, province taking first steps to completely remove restrictions. Now, again, this is a bit of a stretch because there's no hard deadlines. There's no direct lines in the sand that we can easily make conclusions based upon, but I guess it's a step in the right direction. And I need some white pills. You guys probably need some white pills too, in addition to the trucker protest, right? The trucker protest, if it wasn't for the trucker protest, I mean, it'd be a lot harder to smile on these broadcasts. This is from Timcast here. So Sweden lifting national COVID restrictions. Sweden joins neighboring nations of Norway, Denmark, and Finland as the European nations choose to take back our everyday life. And just wanted to highlight the Express and newspaper reported that the government would announce that all mandatory restrictions will expire on February 9th. Now, I want to point out, for all the Canadian premiers, for all the Canadian politicians, this is how you do it. When you decide that you're done with COVID, it shouldn't take weeks or months or be like, hey, by spring, maybe we can look at loosening things up a bit. No, you fucking rip it off like a Band-Aid. All right, and then the last white pill, and this is kind of from a weird direction, but I'm going to call it a white pill. An amazing blog post from Tucker Max. Now, I don't know if you guys remember who Tucker Max was. He kind of popularized the, was it called like frat tire movement? He wrote like, I hope they serve beer in hell. He self-funded that movie. He kind of like was known for being an asshole, right? Did he also write like a book called Assholes Finish First or something? That might also be his. But anyways, he actually he's done a hard pivot in his perspective on the world and everything else. And essentially, he's coined a new term here, doomer optimism, what I see coming and how I'm preparing. And so literally he moved out of Austin, bought a ranch. He's literally doing what I'm doing. Although technically I made my announcement first. So just remember who did it first. But what I did want to highlight, particularly from this essay he put together as a blog post, February 2020. Pre-COVID, I thought I knew how the world worked. I thought I was awake. I didn't think I had everything figured out, but I thought I had the basic lay of the land. 18 months later, I've realized I was very wrong. And honestly, like, I'm getting goosebumps here just reading that, because like that hits me so hard, because that's literally how I feel. Again, I didn't think that I was a super genius in February 2020, but I thought I understood broad strokes how the world worked, right? And over the course of the last 2 years, going through my own blue pill to red pill to black pill to clown pill to white pill journey, I've really realized how fucking wrong and naive I was back then. And I certainly blame myself for a lot of that, but I also blame, well, some of the evil elites, in addition to the yellow press, right? The corporate press, the mainstream legacy media. I know I just like spit out a lot of jargon when I even mention them, but it's just because I just want I want to throw as much shade at them as possible, I guess, because I think they do such a disservice to us by pretending to be neutral, right? By pretending to be independent, by pretending to actually give a fuck about what's going on in reality and trying to report it to us. All right. So again, that maybe wasn't the best breakdown of white pills, but that Tucker Max article actually is really good. He's got links to lots of great resources. In a second blog post on this theme, he actually shared some reading resources. I went and bought every book that was on his list. One, because I'm just addicted to buying books these days. Because again, who knows? Maybe someday my Audible account disappears. But let's leave you guys with a hilarious meme, in my opinion. And me after putting a copy of Capital by Marx in the dieting section. I found this hilarious. And if you guys don't get the joke, the joke is that the USSR and Mao China, they starved the most amount of people in the history of humanity. That's the joke. So if you want to diet, just join a communist regime, let them get into power, and don't worry, you won't have to count calories under them. They'll be more than happy to make sure you get as little as possible. So yeah, that's it for today's Maple Pill. Hopefully I didn't black pill all of you too much. Again, the reason this show is what it is and the way I'm presenting it is because I want you to know you're not alone. But at the same time, being blind to this information does none of us any good. We've seen what happens when too many of us are complicit and complacent over the last couple of years. We need to speak out. We need to stand up. And again, maybe you don't agree with me, but I still encourage you to speak up and stand up for what you believe is right and speak truth, right? Constantly paraphrase Thoreau on this, but more than fame, more than fortune, give me truth. That's all I want is authenticity from the media, from the politicians, and from my fellow citizens. That's it. That shouldn't be too much to ask. But before we wrap up, I'm going to jump into the chat. I appreciate those of you guys that are constantly engaging with me. I do enjoy having this be a two-way conversation. And a reminder, if you guys want to share your thoughts, your opinions, or share potential stories you want to see me cover, best way to do that is by joining the Problems or Profits Discord, link in the video description down below. As well, if you guys didn't know, we're actually doing a mailbag now these days. So every Monday night, I just kind of hang out with you guys, probably going to smoke some weed, goof around. I'll read your letters. So again, if you guys want to send a link to our mailing address in the video description down below. We got Peter. We've got Aislinn in the chat. Appreciate it, guys. Beth, no more rule of law in America. Maybe you guys are better off up there in Canada. I wish we were, Beth. I don't believe we are, though, humbly. Alliston, you're right. You're so right. Well, I appreciate being called right, although I'm not sure what that's specifically about. But yeah, it's a crazy time. I'd almost rather be wrong. Project LB52, what's up, Dan? What's this? I found this interesting. With Pierre.ca, Trudeau must resign. Oh, interesting. I'll check that out. Appreciate you sharing the link. Encrypted message service, Beth says. So Yeah, I know a few people have maybe said things like that. So I'll try and set up like a Proton email, or if you guys have better recommendations, let me know. Because again, I'm new to a lot of this stuff, so I'm open to pointers. Let me know what would be the best way if people want to send me secure private messages. Like I do have a Signal account and Telegraph and Discord, but I'd rather get something that's completely bulletproof if we can. Hey, what's up, Dylan? Mark says, great content, Matt. Appreciate it. Chasing Plane says, how can you believe these studies too? Most science is false. It's hard to know who to trust. It's hard to know what to believe in. Again, I'm not telling you guys what to believe in. I'm just trying to present the information. That's why I include links in the video description down below to all my sources. Now, that being said, I do constantly filter, I try and filter my biases and my desire to jump to conclusions through a couple different, mental frameworks. The one is who's the powerful person, right? And if there's two parties at play, I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt to the David versus the Goliath. There is someone trying to censor discussion and exploration and free thought, or are they open to debates? Are they open to being questioned? Are they open to changing their mind? And again, right now, when I look at our government and our politicians, I don't see them being like, hey, you know what? We're just going to bring our own Health of Canada scientists on Joe Rogan, or we're going to bring our own Health of Canada scientists on Jordan Peterson, and we'll just own him by showing him all the information and data, and any of his counterpoints, we'll have counterpoints for. Again, if they were coming to it with that angle, honestly, it would make me believe them a lot more. Now, again, all the fraud, all the political party shenanigans, the SNC Lavalin, the We Charity, all those things still make me really question the good intentions of a person like Justin Trudeau. But that's just me. Matt for Prime Minister, appreciate it, Logan, but I'm almost of the opinion that anyone that would want to be Prime Minister or anyone that wants to be in politics should almost be disqualified automatically for it. I don't know. I'm a big history buff, and so there was a period of time in Rome where essentially it was considered distasteful or wrong that if your buddies were like, hey, you should go into politics, you had to always deny it the first time. And eventually, if they continued to harass you, you then could eventually agree to that. And essentially the idea there was that anyone that's constantly beating their own drum, anyone that's desperate to get into politics, they're probably a shady character. Bite Hunter says Black Lives Matter is funded primarily from George Soros. Yeah, if you want to go down a huge rabbit hole there, looking at George Soros. And what's interesting too is he recently came out criticizing China. And if I remember my facts correct, he was comparing the current Chinese Olympics to the Berlin Olympics in 1936, which I'll be honest, I didn't have that on my bingo card of conspiracies. I was not expecting him to say that. And we've got Graham in the comments, or no, Good News Bear, sorry. Great work, Matthew 10:15. Verily I say unto you, I shall be more tolerable for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah in the day of judgment than for that city. Bible offline. Well, appreciate the Bible quote. I am actually slowly starting to get a little bit more into reading religious texts and things of that nature. So up until this point in time, the only Bible I've read cover to cover was the Jefferson Bible. And I think that's a great introduction into to Jesus Christ specifically. But anyways, appreciate you guys watching this video. Smash that like button, hit subscribe if you're new to the channel. If you hate having to watch this show on big tech, such as Facebook or YouTube where I live stream, reminder, right after these shows, I immediately upload this broadcast to Rumble, so you can go check it on Rumble. I'll eventually get it up on BitChute and Odyssey. We're also going to get it up on Spotify and other podcast platforms. It's just, this has turned into a much bigger thing than I thought. Originally, I was like, I'll do a 2-hour chunk of my day. 1 hour researching, 1 hour, half an hour presenting to you guys, and half an hour of chat. And it's ballooned into this thing now where I spend at least 4 hours a day on this, 3 hours minimum doing research, and then 1 hour hanging out with you guys and actually presenting the information. So again, if you guys enjoyed, please consider sharing this on social media, because big tech definitely isn't going to do me any favors when it comes to algorithms and things of that nature. But you don't have to either. But please do remember, you're not alone. Your voice does matter. And I encourage you guys, go watch that video with Jordan Peterson and Brian Peckford. Also, please write anyone. Write your grandma if you have to, but write someone about Bill C-10. And please let them know that you're not okay with that. Because the chips are already so stacked in big media's favor that, like, they don't need any more benefits, right? And we already are so restricted in our speech here. Where in Canada, we've seen things like fathers be charged and penalized for not calling their child their preferred pronoun. We've seen things like comedians get in trouble for offensive jokes. These are all very slippery slopes. And while I've got no doubt that those that want to impose these rules and regulations have the best of intentions, I really do fear the unintended consequences that are likely to come from them. At the end of the day, that which governs least governs best. I forget who I stole that quote from, but it's a hell of a quote. Appreciate you guys. I'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And let's just keep on trucking in the free world. I encourage you guys, go out to the protest this weekend if you're so inclined. I think that there'll be a good crowd there again.